Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 9th chapter in the book of Job. We're going to divide it in half. We're going to take it all the way up to the 13th chapter, save the longer portion of the chapter for another day, because the way we're going to divide Job's speech, which spans the range of chapters 9 and 10, is into the three main questions he asks. And in the we'll explain more when we get to there, but we just want to briefly review the book of Job itself. In the open introductory chapter, we meet Job, a man of faith who had everything a man of faith could want: many children, plenty of possessions, wealth, influence, respect. Eschewed evil, was upright and blameless. And then we are drifted into the heavenly council where Satan has access. And he asks him, "Where have you been?" You've been about to and fro of the earth, scouring the earth, with implicit pride, because the world has succumbed to his wickedness and his ways. But Yahweh says, "There is one man I will point to with pride in this world which is wicked, and that is my servant Job." And Satan successfully tempts him into taking away his wealth and his family in the interest of tempting Job to blaspheme Yahweh. And Yahweh consents to the challenge, and Job doesn't satisfy it by the 21st verse of the opening chapter. And then he says, all right, take away his health. He's going to move on, and he zaps Job with terrible skin boils. So he's in this degraded, miserable condition, and his wife, the last one living, to whom he was in his family, says, why don't you curse Yahweh and die? And he consents to the latter part. A death wish forms the juxt of the 3rd chapter, which initiates the dialogue on earth, but he refuses to consent to her demand to curse Yahweh and succumb to Satan's temptation. He says, you speak as a foolish woman. Then in the 3rd chapter, Job gets the bulk of the book going, which consists of an exchange between 5 men to make sense of it all, 3 of which we are introduced to in the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter. These are men of influence, men of wisdom, and men of prosperity throughout the Edomite territory, who traveled upon hearing what happened to Job, and they spend 7 days in prolonged silence. Then Job breaks out with essentially cursing the day he was born. He not only wishes for death, but wishes that he had never been born. He had not existed. Life is not worth it, even having all that he had, just to lose it all in a day, and everything he had, literally, suddenly and inexplicably, he thought life wasn't worth it. Then Eliphaz the Temanite, the first mentioned, ordered in the order of as presented in 2:11. The main thing he speaks to Job, which speaks more to us than it does to Job, is despise not the discipline of Yahweh. His speech comprises the 4th and 5th chapter, and then Job responds in the 6th. So Job wasn't being disciplined because he deserved it. He was being tested to prove a point to Satan that even though all others forsake me, there is at least one person living who will not. So that's kind of a big deal in the heavenly council. So it does poses a lot. Job does doubt the justice of God throughout this, but that's only human. And then in the 6th chapter, he renews his death wish at certain points, and he rebukes his rebuker so far. And then in the 7th chapter, he kind of takes it up to Yahweh. He speaks to Yahweh in the 7th. And then the 8th, Bildad is the second of these comforters, as so named in verse 2:11. The Shuathite gets his turn, and he responds to how Job responded. He says, does El twist justice, or does El Shaddai twist what is right? Yahweh is morally perfect and morally flawless, so it's not immoral of him to do as he sees fit. Who are they to question? And the might is right in the answer that he eventually supplies them. He establishes his justice on his omnipotence. If your sons have sinned against him, and he delivers them into the hand of their transgression. So he's claiming that the sons, they were in the physical barns and the structures collapsed on them while they were gathering in numbers, and only one servant escaped to tell Job. So he's implying that they had deserved, this was the just consequence of their sin, or Eliphaz implies that it had been on account of his sin that the east wind blew down the structure. But then he says, diligently seek El and plead with El Shaddai. So this form, Job does eventually, this piece of advice does get a ball rolling in motion, which Job does take to the next level. Though your beginning was small, yet your latter end would greatly increase. 7th verse, he doesn't know how true this prediction will come. Job will be rewarded with twofold prosperity for enduring with patience the trial that had been sent his way, and for not forsaking his faith or his integrity. The adversary can take our health and our wealth, but he cannot take our faith and integrity, and that's what Job preserved and maintained intact, and through his patient endurance he was rewarded materialistically and family-wise, twofold. And then he appeals to the ancients as a source of superior wisdom. He finds more wisdom in the ancients than in the contemporaries, and I think that's mostly correct. For we are but of yesterday and know not, because our days on earth are as a shadow. So we in one single lifetime could not accumulate all the information and intelligence that we have. It is we expand on the contributions of our forebears, and if we see farther than those who came before us, it's only because we stand on the shoulder of giants to appropriate the humility of one of the history's most brilliant scientists, Sir Isaac Newton, who believed in a literal translation of the book of Genesis, ironclad creationist from start to finish. And he says, there's some educative value. Then he transitions to natural worlds, papyrus and trees, and likens it to the path of those who forget. To forget requires one to be in a relationship with him to begin with. And, spider's web, leaning house, moist before the sun, roots wrap around a heap. These are all relatable physical phenomenon. Then in the 20th verse, he says, see, El does not cast away the perfect, neither hold the hand of the evildoers. So according to his archaic, simplistic, white and black theology, the binary is that if you are prospering in the world, it is a reward for your righteousness. And if you are not, that means God's hand is against you because your hand is against him. So according to this logic, the wealthiest person on the planet would be the most righteous. And, we're not going to single out Jeff Bezos for the moment just because he happens to be the world's richest man at the filming of this. We're going to move to the 9th chapter. And remember, the way we chose to divide Job's speech is according to the 3 questions. In the 10th chapter, we witness several question marks, but the 10th chapter can be summed up as in the question of, why was I born? For what reason? What purpose is there for my existence, my life? And what is my reason I was born? And in the 9th chapter, he asks, how is man right with Elohim? In the 2nd verse, we'll get to that when we get to it. Then in the 14th chapter, he asks, how much less would I answer him? Choose my words with him. So he's imagining and anticipating the courtroom that Bildad is imploring him to plead for. And and then there's a question mark in the 19th verse, but these are rhetorical questions, so we're actually don't have time to cover that range today. We're going to get from the beginning. And Job answered and said, so the same thing I say after every introductory verse is, what do you think he's going to answer with? You remember that the verses we quote are usually foundationally significant to the chapter which comes after it. Truly I know it so, but how is man right with Elohim? So he's acknowledging and affirming the correctness of his words. He knows that what he says is true. There is plenty of truth in what he speaks, but he's not completely true. But how can man be right with Elohim? And that is the great unanswered question. And from his vantage point, we are stained by sin. He is so sacred that the single sin unatoned for in his sacred presence, no sinful thing, no unclean thing can enter allowance into his presence. So the way that we are justified through the blood of the Messiah, we learn in the 2 the New Testament, but Job doesn't have that revelation. We do. So he wants to know, if I am not right with Elohim, how can one be right? Because I maybe did something, or he's doing something that is against his just nature. Why me? If one wanted to dispute with him, he would not answer him 1 time out of 1,000. So he's kind of being lackadaisical on his on Bildad's piece of advice. Remember, he said to plead his day in court, seek him diligently. But he's saying 1,000 once is too many, and 1,000 times is never enough. You cannot get an immediate response. You cannot even get one after diligent inquiry. There is a qualitative chasm that exists between us and him. So even in his suffering and all his dilemma, he wants an encounter, a direct encounter with divinity to settle his case. But he knows, it's his prerogative, and he does eventually reveal himself, and what he says is a revelation of his power, and not necessarily. We also learn that he is a God of promises, not explanations, and that. But that's getting a little far ahead of ourselves. Wise in heart and mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him and is at peace? If you are at war with Elohim, that means you will not know peace in this life or the next. The whole world is at the war with Elohim because their values and their culture is at odds with his way, his work, and his kingdom. So they wage war against God and his people. But we who are his people are wise in heart, mighty in strength, not because we are stronger or more intelligent than the enemies which try to subsume us and surround us, but because our strength and our guidance comes from him, who is omnipotent and omnipresent, respectively the attributes of infinite or unlimited strength and intelligence. He who removes mountains, and they do not know it, when he overturns them in his displeasure. So the might behind his hand is sufficient to uproot mountains, and we are told in the New Testament that by faith we can displace mountains. So faith is a principle of power in action, and Yahweh, who is an intrinsically faithful being, has the miraculous potential to instantly uproot and discard or replace mountains, and you wouldn't even know it. That's how magnificent he is. He shows his traces all across the world, and tragically the world misses the revelation of himself in nature. So he overturns them when he is displeased, and natural calamities or strange stuff happening in the natural world would have been likened to and automatically associated with divine judgments by the ancients. Who shakes the earth out of its place, and its columns tremble, who commands the sun, and it does not rise, and he seals up the stars, stretching out the heavens by himself, and treading upon the waves of the sea. So his omnipotence is omnipresent. These are the combined attributes of the ability to be everywhere at once. And remember, the attribute of infinite or unlimited intelligence, the prefix omni means unlimited, or that thing. So his magnificence and his splendor and his strength are across the earth and the heavens, which he created. All the stars that we see in the sky are the work of his hands, and he knows them by name, the psalmist tells us. So the sun is in control, and it only rises because he allows it to rise, and he keeps the stars in their positions for their purpose, which is beyond us, which is beyond our knowing, beyond our reckoning. The Hebrews had limited astrology, astrological knowledge, and they were forbidden from the practice of astrology, which is alive and well in our own time. If you see a horoscope, don't put too much faith in it. In fact, get rid of it. Don't get palm readings or any of the other forbidden practices as outlined in Deuteronomy's 18th chapter. For the Old Covenant, we in the New Covenant would be equally wise to heed those instructions. who made Ash, Kthsil, and Kima, and the rooms of the south, who performs great and unsearchable deeds and innumerable wonders. So these are constellations in the sky, and the existence of constellations would have stimulated awe and wonder in any audience, and the Hebrews were certainly no exception. They didn't worship stars as the other cultures were accustomed to doing. They worshiped the one who made the stars, and that's what made them spiritually stronger and superior to any of their neighbors. And what we read of in verse 10 is a recitation of what Eliphaz says in 5:9 when he burst out into his doxology. He and Job is in the midst of a doxology himself. This is an expression of praise of his awe-inspiring might and wonder in the natural world alone. So the miracles he performs are literally beyond our reckoning. We cannot count them. He does stuff and we don't even know it. So there's literally innumerable wonders. We have no idea how many miracles he has performed that has escaped our notice. I can tell you he's performing at least one somewhere in the world right now as we speak. Look, he goes by me, and I do not see, and if he moves past, but I do not discern him. So he is present, he is accessible, and he is available. He is as close as the mention of his name. If it is uttered from a sincere heart, then he will be there. And but there's he makes himself known, and he is visible yet invisible. He is a physically invisible being, but he is made visible by faith. We can unlock him, not see him as we see the image in the mirror. I'm seeing myself right now, as probably are you, but we can have an awareness of his existence through the eyes of faith, which function not quite the same as the eyes of sight. But it's an anthropomorphism for the spiritual faculties which observe the things of the spirit. Look, he snatches away. Who brings it back? Who says to him, what are you doing? So none of us even have the access or allowance to protest anything, and a lot of people do protest. Some things are accidents in the cause of free will, so every child that dies prematurely, every teenager that gets cancer, that's not necessarily his will or his fault. He is only obligated to intervene when he deems necessary. So he does, miraculously rescind some cancers, but, he's not obligated to do it, and we are not to question his will, his wisdom, or his ways, because it is beyond our reckoning. Eloah does not turn back his displeasure. The helpers of pride stoop under him. So Eloah is the singular tense version of Elohim, which is a plural. Elohim is a team, Father, Son, and Spirit. Of course, the Hebrews would have thought differently. They do not, the Jews to this day, first off, Job wasn't a Jew, neither were his comforters. They were Edomites, but they were Jews by belief. And he's affirming that, once his displeasure is upon you, it is irreversible, but he's going to be disproven in that claim when his prosperity and his health returns, his prosperity and his family returns twofold, and the family was a mark of success in the ancient world, and the large family would have made you the envy of your neighbors. But the helpers of pride stoop under him. Now, when we exalt ourselves, we will be humiliated by the sovereign one whom we have offended through mimicking the pride of sin, which precipitated the original sin of Lucifer's rebellion and the fall of man. It's all rooted in pride, and the wicked and the proud countenance of his heart does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts, we read of in Psalms 10:4. But that's all the time we have for today. We're going to take up this lesson on the next question, which is, how much less would I answer him? Choose my words. So what would he say in such a situation, even if he had this audience that he doesn't have much faith in his ability to access or even deserving to, but what would he say in such a situation? And that gets the ball rolling in interesting directions. We'll take it up next time. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you. Take care. Stay tuned until next time. Bye-bye.